Amen. All right, so we are continuing looking at this sermon series called The Way. And the whole idea behind this one is, we think about the way of Jesus, the way of the kingdom of God. And I think there's this idea that if I can just get on the path of Jesus, if I get on that path, then things will go right for me, right? It'll be easy and all that stuff. It's like no, like the path of Jesus is often difficult. It has a cross on it, right? And we see that there's all these signs, all these other things that are pointing to this path of Jesus. And we see that they're broken as well. So we've been looking at some of these. We did justice, love. Today we're doing spirituality, beauty, freedom, truth, and power. Next week will be beauty, and hopefully that sermon will be beautiful. But, so we're talking about spirituality today, and some of you are going, that doesn't say spirituality, that says spiritual. The reason why that's like that is spirituality is quite a bit longer of a word, and it didn't look right when I made it on there. And so I put just spiritual on there, and you guys can fill in the rest. But because this is our hero graphic, everything outside of this is kind of the graphic for the day. But so what does it mean to be spiritual? Like what does that mean? Like when I say spirituality, how does it make you feel? Are you comfortable with like spiritual things? Are you comfortable with talking about being spiritual? Like what comes up to your mind when I say that? When I say someone is spiritual, do you instantly like picture this guy eating granola on top of this hill, trying to get close, right? Like is that what you think of? Because I think that's kind of the definition that we usually have, because we usually define spiritual as like deeply serious and alone, right? Like I'm going to go up to the top of the mountain, I'm going to eat my granola, and I'm going to get with God, right? Like that's you have those people that are like, well, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual type of ideas, right? Like that's I keep on making fun of granola. Me and granola have a tortured history. I like granola, I do. But I can like things that I don't understand, and here's what I mean by that. Probably about 8 years ago, Coley was going to make everyone Christmas gifts, and she made granola. Now, when she told me she was going to make granola, I was like, how do you make granola? Because I thought granola was just like a plant. Like that's, and I even though I've eaten these bars out of all that, listen, I never said I was smart, okay? Like that's like that. I just thought it was. She goes, no, it's like oats and things like that. And I'm like, oh, like that's embarrassing. Like that's. I was in my 30s, like that's. I was paying a mortgage, and didn't understand what granola was. But like that's. I think many times we think spirituality is this thing where it's like, oh, I'm going to get alone with God or something like that. And that's not all terrible, but that's kind of not the root of it. And the thing is, this idea has really come and really coming on the church because, and I think some of it is kind of Western kind of thought, a lot of American thought actually, where it's like this rugged individualism. We've kind of turned our faith into this kind of rugged individualism, and it's turned it into this like, you gotta, how's your personal relationship with Jesus? There's precious little about your personal relationship with Jesus in the Bible. Precious little. That's something we kind of turned in on it, right? Like that's like we turn like church into like it's something that you go and you're supposed to hear something that'll rally you for the today. Sorry, like that's just like, I'm sick. I don't know if that's going to happen this week, But it's like this deeply personal thing type of thing, like it's all about you just being praying. And it's about you having a strong spiritual life. It's all about you being super serious in your faith life, right? It's like, ooh, Jesus, like that's, and so it ends up kind of turning into this thing where it's like this deep, something serious that you're trying to deeply try to do, and you do it by yourself. That idea is actually one of the original heresies of the church. The Paul, in all of his like letters, it's the number one thing that he's trying to go against. The Apostles' Creed that we just said its major reason why it's written is to go against this main heresy. And that heresy is called Gnosticism. And what Gnosticism basically is that if I can ascend into a more spiritual plane, I'll finally be able to shed off all this evil physical things that are on me and rise into glory, right? Some of you may have heard similar language at funerals. None of them here. But that's kind of Gnosticism, is that if I can just ascend unto this more God level, then things will be so much better for me. I mean, think about the Apostles' Creed. We talk about this in confirmation constantly, is that when you talk to the Apostles' Creed talks about Jesus, have you noticed how it talks about the physicalness of Jesus and like what happens to him? It's because in our spiritual thought, is that our spiritual thought is insanely physical. Is that it's very physical. And it's all right here that God, creator of everything, came down and decided that he might like to try granola. Maybe. Did they have granola back then? They had milk and honey. Like they had bees. They had oats, right? They had granola. Like that. That's like so that's, and so he's eating all these things, and so God wanted to come down, and he became this physical one, right? And so that's kind of, and if you look up spiritual books today, what do you think you would see? Like if you went onto Amazon, you're like, I wanted to look up a spiritual book. What would you find? Like self-help books, right? Like how to become a better you, right? Like how to become all this stuff. It's all these things that are like deeply serious and like alone. All right, so here's what we need to do. Let's look at, for a second, Hebrew spirituality. All right, let's look at this and see what Hebrew spirituality is telling us. So the whole idea behind Hebrew spirituality begins in the Garden of Eden. And the Garden of Eden is this moment where God created order out of all this chaos, all these things that are bustling all around, and he created us and all these physical things and all of us here. In God's realm, his kingdom and the kingdom of the creation were like in complete synchronous, you know? Everything is like perfectly circled all together inside of it. And then all of a sudden the fall happened. And God's kingdom and the kingdom of the creation all of a sudden separated. And then in the Exodus, remember how we talked about last week, the way God shows us love is he said, tear down this temple and I'll rebuild it in 3 days. And they built the tabernacle. And the tabernacle is what started those two circles, and they started to like a Venn diagram right in the midst of it. And in the midst of that was God's hotspot. His presence in the creation was in that temple. And they did all kinds of cool things to show this. When they actually built a physical temple, in the Holy of Holies, they would have reliefs on the side of the walls that showed all these fruit trees and all these things, because it was showing you that this, in the middle of the temple, was the Garden of Eden, the place where God's presence and our presence were together right there together. And then they also had on these big pillars, I have a photograph of it. All right, so it's right here. These angel-looking dudes are guys just like me doing this, all right, in the bottom. So like that's on the bottom there. And this would have been like Herod's temple that's like around Jesus' day. It's like the entrance to the Holy of Holies. And there's these big golden pillars. And those, it's kind of hard to see back that far where you are. But it's all these golden vines going up the side of it with these giant grapes, giant, vineyard, and they make wine out of them, all the way going up. And it's these vines over there. And it's this sense that here in the Holy of Holies, in the midst of the temple, is the place where God's presence is connected. It's kind of like a Jack and the Beanstalk idea, but not really, right? Like that he's connected like a vine is connected all of here. So, and here's evidence that we know what this was, because this temple was destroyed. This is from Josephus, which is a historian from around Jesus' time. He says, the gate opening into the building was, as I said, completely overlaid with gold, as was the whole wall around it. it above it had golden vines which descended grape clusters as tall as a man. Okay? So this whole idea of vines going in there. And this is what people, the average Hebrew person who knew about the temple and how it was God coming to there, this is what they understood was the connection then, right? So they knew about these vines going up there. They had this picture in their minds. So when we get to our gospel lesson today in John chapter 15, it should bring new light to you. When Jesus says, I am the true vine and my Father is the gardener. Like everyone is connecting this idea of vine with that Holy of Holies in the middle there. And I love that he calls the Father the gardener here, because so often, at least this is my old sense of God. I don't know, maybe you guys have a different sense. God the Father is this very clean, offset, something over that's not integrated into the creation at all, right? Very we're let there be light. Ooh, yes, all that stuff. No, but I love when he's the gardener, because a gardener is coming in after being in the yard all day when you're trying to make things plant and grow, even though it hasn't rained in 4 weeks and there's pollen everywhere. And God the Father comes in, the gardener comes in and he shakes off and this yellow pollen falls off all over him as he has these dirty hands because he's been digging and cultivating the ground, causing fruitfulness all around. That's the image and the Hebrews have of God, right? This intensely physical image of the gardener, right? And Jesus says that I'm the vine. It's that connection. And then we go to verse 5. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you'll bear much fruit, and apart from me, you can do nothing. And so there's this sense that the faith is just this individual thing, but in all honesty, when we look at each other all around here, it's not that we see individual little pods, but we see a mess of vines going on around. Has anyone ever messed with kudzu before? I'm from Georgia. I know kudzu. Some of you are like, what is kudzu? Kudzu is a vine that will take over everything, without even trying. It just takes it over. That's when I look around you guys, it's not little individual pods. You guys look like kudzu covering the woods. Right? I know, right? You should be offended. That's what it is. But it's these vines. It's connected. Now, I know what Jesus is saying. It's no, we're vines like a vineyard. We're like Napa Valley, swirling your wine, and drinking it and stuff like that. But it's all the same ideas. It's these vines that are all connected there. And so you get there. Now, this is a beautiful image, but I want to ask you something. So this is next level. I'm not expecting you to get this, not even the pastor in the room. Right after all this vine talk, what does Jesus start talking about? There's a core idea. Does anyone remember? I wouldn't have remembered it until we were getting ready for this sermon. And then I was like, oh, that's cool. As soon as I saw that, I was like, I've never made this connection before. I'm learning stuff new on Tuesday this last week. So let's see. Let me see if I can. Our sermon hymn was about it. At least the title was. Anyone can guess? It's friends. Friends. Jesus talks about this great connection with the Father, the gardener, and all these things. And he comes off of this connection of all the vines. And this is verse 13. Of chapter 50. This is right after all that stuff, right after the gospel reading that I had about all the vines and the branches and prunings and all that stuff. And Jesus says this, greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends. Now, I think a lot of times we read this verse and we're like, oh, this is something we start thinking yes, we got laying down life for friends. Think about what Jesus knows though, and think about who Jesus is hanging out with. Jesus is hanging out with his friends. He's hanging out with his disciples. He's hanging out with his buddies, right? And he probably knows what his path is. At least John is letting us know that Jesus knows what his path is here. That he's going to lay his life down for his friends, right? So greater love to lay down his life for one's friends. And then he continues on. You are my friends if you do what I command. Don't get caught up on that, because we're going to explain what that means. What does it mean if you do what he commands? I no longer call you servants, because a servant doesn't know what his master's business is. But you do. You do. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything I've learned from my Father, I have made known to you. Now, friends, you always have special relationships with your friends, right? Like, I can remember, like, when I think of, like, friends, I immediately think of, like, college. And I could tell college stories for 3 days, probably, because I had ridiculous friends, but I'll just tell this one. We lived in an apartment-style dorm, and which meant we had like a common room and 2 bedrooms and a bathroom and all of that. And it was inside this building, and it was made with the cheapest stuff possible, right? This dorm, which was never a good idea for like college-aged men to be bouncing around, or boys, you could say, like bouncing around in. And one of the things that we had started doing was when someone would leave our little unit and go out into the hallway to talk to someone else, and they didn't have their keys with them, we would lock them out. Ha ha ha, right? Like, this is just what we would do. And so I went over and talked with a friend, got locked out. And because everything was super cheap, you could usually like finagle it in such a way that you could break back in. So it was always a struggle in order to not let the person back into the dorm room, is basically what it was. So what it usually meant is my other 3 roommates would try to keep the one poor soul, in this case, me, from not getting back into the dorm, okay? So they are barricading me from the door, from the dorm room, and I have gotten the door unlocked and it's twisted, right? No, it's not even twisted. Like it's still latched. And I'm like, I'm going to open this door, right? And so I put all my weight into it, like all of it. And I still have this vision in my head, because when I put all my weight into it, the whole door flexed from the top open, and I saw all 3 of my friends' faces, and they opened it up and like it flung me back. Then they immediately unlocked the door and opened it, like, we saw you, like that's not supposed to happen indoors, right? Like, it's just one of these stories that's like this intense friendship, like this moment, right, of friends that you have. And Jesus is connecting that idea with the vine, that you're connected here, and it's so much more than that, than just connectedness, but it's also this idea of friendship. Because I think one of our things that we get in trouble with in the church is that we only focus on the blaze of glory. Yes, spirituality, Hebrew spirituality, Christian spirituality talks about the awesomeness of God, this blaze of glory of God. John talks about it so much, that Jesus is, creator of the entire universe. In the beginning, he created light, right? The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. I love that language. Like, it's so physical. See how it's going against that overly spiritualizing thing, that this physical is spiritual type of thing. That he's saying that the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. He created everything. Like, this awesomeness of God is on display when the Hebrews are going through the Red Sea on dry ground on each side. Moses trembling, going up the mountain as God gives him all those 10 commandments, right? Like, all of this. Isaiah, when he has that vision where he's caught up into heaven, right? And he looks at the awesomeness of God, and he goes, I am a man of unclean lips, and I live amongst a people of unclean lips. Like, yes, we have this awesomeness, this blaze of glory idea. But key to spirituality and that we see in Jesus is also with a light touch and whimsy. Because that's what you see when you see Jesus. There's a story in the Gospel of Mark where it says that Jesus is walking on the water and the disciples are like struggling at the oars because it's like, and as Mark puts it this way, it's like Jesus wanted to walk past them. Why was he doing that? Like he's walking past them. He's like, can you guys do this? Like that's, he's like messing with them. You know, like and one of the ways that I started growing so much in my own faith is when I allowed the Bible to get out of being serious constantly and let it be a little sarcastic. Because when that happened, suddenly you start seeing the love of God for his friends fall off of the page. I think the resurrection narrative in John shows this light touch and whimsy so well. Because think about what Jesus did. He popped out of the tomb, right? He came out of the tomb in this blaze of glory, doing the serious work, right? But think about it. Like, I think a lot of times we make Jesus into this otherworldly person. Put yourself into Jesus' shoes for a little bit. You just did major serious work, right? About saving like everybody. And now you're back. Are you just going to go back like normally? No. It's like when you have a surprise birthday party and it's your job to get your friend to the surprise birthday party. Like you constantly mess with them, don't you? The whole time there. I overdid it when I proposed to Coley. I messed with her so much before I proposed to her that she was worried I was going to break up with her. I overdid it. Right? Like it's over there, but you're like messing with them and you're like, oh man, no one loves you. You know, I can't believe it's your birthday and you're just going out to this thing. And then all of a sudden, surprise, right? Allow yourself to think about how Jesus interacts with his disciples after he rises from the dead. Mary comes running up to the tomb crying. She's like, the body's gone. Who stole the body? And in this light touch, in this beautiful story that only a friend would be able to do, he kind of tricks her into thinking that he's the gardener, which is a beautiful part of the story, right? It's this light touch. But then think about doubting Thomas. Man, we make this story way too serious about doubting Thomas. Because think about the story. Jesus shows up with all of his disciples and they're like, Jesus, and over there. And then like Thomas shows up late. You always have that one friend that shows up late to everything, right? Like over there. And he shows up late and they're like, we all saw Jesus. And he's like, no, you didn't. Quit. Like, come on, like, you didn't see Jesus. Quit messing with me. Like, no, we did. He's like, no, you didn't. And then Jesus, in a fully spiritualized, real body, all of a sudden shows up. And do you think Jesus is like, Thomas? No, he's like fully messed with, like, oh, you don't believe, do you? You don't believe? Put your hand here. Come on, do it, I dare you. Put it in those things, like look at it through that lens. Put your hand in my side, Thomas. And suddenly you see this light touch of Jesus hanging out with his friends. And it's beautiful. And I think when you look at that, this is the key to Christian spirituality. That yes, we deal with serious stuff. And we talk about all that. But we also talk about weird cough drops. I share a stage with Elvis, well, at least an impersonator, right? Like we laugh and enjoy each other because that's what Jesus did. He is our friend. So we do the serious stuff, but we also laugh along the way because Jesus has freed us. Freed us from the doldrums, freed us from the things that hinder us, that we may be able to laugh as those who have been made free. And I think that's good news. And we'll end right there. Let's say a prayer. Jesus, we thank you that you love us and that you have freed us. Lord, let us follow that same way that way of talking about the deeply serious stuff, but also with just that light touch, with that little bit of whimsy. Lord, let us see how you are our friend, and that we are friends here, that we can go and we can share that love and grace with so many around us. Thank you, Jesus. Amen. So thank you so much for listening to all of that.